As many of you know on this channel, we do a series covering weird, wacky, and downright terrible ships. Which got me thinking, what are the worst battleships, or ships for that matter, of all time? Today's video is the first installment of a new series, looking at nations' worst battleships. And the first class up is the Indiana class, arguably the worst American battleships ever built. These reasons can be boiled down to several. They had extremely low freeboard and poor seakeeping and stability, along with other issues. These just scratch the surface of why they were terrible battleships, so let's dig into that a bit more. The United States Navy of the late 19th century was certainly not the United States Navy of the Second World War or today. It was a small force, mostly comprising obsolete vessels left over from the American Civil War. But by the mid-1880s, the nation had a need to modernize and grow the fleet with outside threats such as Brazilian battleship construction and European powers. Thus, the construction of newer capital ships was considered, and then started. However, Congress was hamstringing further development of the Navy due to budgetary reasons, and only 3 seagoing armored ships had been authorized, including Maine and Texas. There were also some monitors from the mid-1870s kicking about, Monterey, the new cruising monitor, and a new ram, which comprised the Navy's modern force. Through continued talks between Congress and the Policy Board of the Navy, there was some realization of threats posed by outside powers, notably Britain and her modern battleship fleet, of which during the time of the talks in 1890, 7 of her 20 modern battleships could operate from their home bases and go to the United States East Coast, while they had 10 more under construction that could match those capabilities, not to mention their Caribbean or Canadian bases. The French, on the other hand, had Caribbean bases and were in the process of digging the Panama Canal, a prospect that could put American hegemony in the Western Hemisphere in doubt. Dr. Norman Friedman in U.S. Battleships and Illustrated Design History writes, "The Policy Board envisaged 2 fleets, one consisting of 10 fast, 17-knot, long-endurance battleships, 10,800 nautical miles at 10 knots, 13,000 at economical speed, remarkable figures given the time, to carry war to enemy waters. Such ships were justified, in part, as a fleet in being that would compel an enemy to retain powerful forces in home waters. The second fleet, built around 25 shorter-range ships, would dominate the Western Atlantic and Eastern Pacific. They would break any blockade and would be responsible for the destruction of an enemy fleet operating base. Draft would be limited to 23.5 feet so that ships could pass over bars at the mouth of southern ports. This home fleet would operate inside a line 1,000 miles off the Atlantic coast, from the mouth of the St. Lawrence River south to the Windward Islands in the Caribbean and to Panama. The ships were to have a top speed of around 15 knots, and a range of 5,200 nautical miles at an economical speed." Taking from Dr. Friedman again, "Probably for reasons of economy, the board called for 3 categories of short-range ships. First class, 8 ships of 8,000 tons with 4 13-inch guns. Second class, 10 of 7,100 tons with 4 12-inch guns. And third class, 5 of 6,000 tons with 2 12-inch and 2 10-inch guns. The 3 armored ships already authorized fit only into this third class. The total program also included substantial numbers of rams, cruisers, and torpedo craft for local defense. The estimated cost was $281.5 million, a huge sum for the time. Congress understandably was a bit shocked by the price tag, with Senator Eugene Hale of Maine, one of the supporters, fearing that no money would be approved and hoping that gradually this program could be brought to fruition. The House did approve some ships. It approved 3 8,500-ton battleships in April 1890, these being our 3 Indiana-class battleships, Indiana, Oregon, and of course Massachusetts. The only reason they were able to pass the construction of these 3 is that tensions were cooled in Congress by claiming that these new ships would be so powerful that they would only need to build 12 in total instead of the proposed 20. At the same time, costs would be cut, sending more old Civil War monitors to the state militias for service. To take from Dr. Friedman once more, it is conventional to describe the designation coast defense battleships applied to the 3 Indianas as a sop to congressional fears of overseas warfare, but a reading of the Policy Board report, which, after all, was used to justify these 3 ships, makes it clear that they were the first installment of a rational fleet plan. That plan differed from the board's largely in its stretched-out timescale, as a situation common to many later multi-year programs. Anyway, the most powerful gun available to the United States Navy at the time was the 13-inch 35 caliber gun, and it was still in the design stages during 1890. Forging for prototypes would soon be ordered. If those guns were used, weight would have to be saved on some ships, as those guns were really heavy. The planners would mount new 12-inch 35 caliber weapons, while the 13-inch gun was eventually developed fast enough to be used on the ships, while BUORD, or the Bureau of Ordnance, promised new rapid-firing 5-inch guns, as they had their hands in the designs, considering them the optimal size for the largest caliber, admitting of reasonably convenient fixed ammunition, and well adapted to attack unarmored or lightly protected sides. An unusual feature of the long-range design was provisions for 2 engines on each shaft, either of which could be used for cruising, while the other would be shut down to prolong engine life. This ingenious solution, which to the problem of reciprocating engine endurance was expected to cost only 6 to 7% more in weight, of course, than conventional power plants. Some of the following changes in the design to the armor, machinery, and weaponry related to the long-range battleships surely had an impact on the Indiana class. Thus, on June 30th, 1890, the 3 coastal defense battleships were authorized to displace around 8,500 tons and to have a coal endurance of 5,500 nautical miles as designed. They showed major changes, though. Thicker belts, 18 inches rather than 17 inches, and a mixed secondary battery of 4 8-inch guns and 4 6-inch guns, rather than the uniform rapid-firing battery previously mentioned. The latter change is a break from foreign practice. The United States could not manufacture the 5-inch rapid-firing guns. Foreign battleships were armed with and armored against 6-inch weapons of this type. The difference of any inch may seem trivial, but as the weight of a shell rises, it causes issues later on, where Dr. Friedman writes, "In effect, the United States was an underdeveloped country attempting to improve its technology and match foreign weapons of a more sophisticated type. The solution was to use a heavier, slower-firing weapon, the 8-inch gun. Its shell would be about 4 times the weight of the 5-inch or 2.3 times the weight of the 6-inch gun, either rapid-firing or conventional. Moreover, 8-inch shells would defeat armor designed to resist 6-inch guns. This not being exactly the best choice, as 8-inch guns were heavy and cumbersome, and on a short ship built on a limited displacement, blast interference would be severe. For a given total of guns and ammunition, a 6-inch battery could devote more weight to ammunition, causing the United States Navy to briefly abandon the 8-inch weapon in 1896. It's a little bit of a tangent, but still, it shows how our class might have some issues. Standard U.S. Navy practices of this period allowed builders to propose alternatives to the official design, given the fact that the United States Navy didn't have a lot of experience with building battleships at the time, something similar to the issues we've seen with the French ships of this period. William Cramp and Sons suggested the ships be lengthened by 12 feet to accommodate twin 8-inch turrets for a total of 8 guns, as well as more powerful engines. Cramp received a contract for both Indiana and Massachusetts, while the third ship, Oregon, would be built on the West Coast. Cramp's design was used by Union Iron Works, the people who built Oregon, and their displacement rose to 10,300 tons, and the length increased to 350 feet, 11 inches. Although the contract design called for several above-water torpedo tubes, the ships were completed with 5, 4 in Indiana. During construction, the design was further modified. The truncated cone-shaped turrets that were initially proposed were to be replaced by more conventional cylindrical turrets. Harvey armor was used as a substitute for some of the nickel steel originally specified, pointing the way toward lighter but still effective armor suits. At the time, it was claimed that 6-inch Harvey steel would be the equivalent of 18 inches of nickel steel, and the changes would save 60 tons. It was rejected solely to avoid delay. Like we've been doing in recent videos, I'll post the particulars on the screen now so you can get a good look at them, and possibly pause to read through them. Notice the fact that they did end up with those 13-inch guns, as I previously mentioned. Now it comes to the point in the video where we have to go over what made the ship so poor, and taking from Dr. Friedman once more, the three Indianas were not particularly successful. Although designed with a substantial maximum bunker capacity, their armor was so placed as to be ineffective if they carried more than 400 tons. Unfortunately, they usually operated fully loaded, so that an already low freeboard was only made worse, and contemporary writers derided them as extremely wet, even though the hulls had been lengthened to take first 8-inch guns and then 8-inch turrets. They suffered badly from blast interference. Later writers would suggest that they were overgunned, but that seems unfair given the problems the designers faced, those being the issues with not being able to produce the rapid-firing guns the Navy wanted. In addition to those problems mentioned, the Walker Board on battleship design criticized the Indianas as cramped and undermanned, with only 9 line officers being assigned to each ship, which meant none for the torpedoes, main deck battery, or secondary battery, and no margin in case someone was killed in action. The board considered the nominal draft of 24 feet with 400 tons of coal to not be the case, since the ships would always go to sea with much greater loads. The Indiana, for example, had an ammunition allowance of 400 tons and a coal allowance of 400 tons, although her full coal capacity was 1,600 tons. When inspected upon completion, she had only 120 tons of ammunition and 400 of coal on board, but in service, with 1,000 tons of ammunition and 1,200 of coal, she drew 25 feet 8 inches. With full load, she drew closer to 27 feet. The board says, this increased immersion reduces her speed and freeboard, affects her tactical qualities, and alters the position of the armor belt. At her maximum draft, the belt would be entirely submerged. So essentially, in a fight, her main armor belt would be underwater, and thus ineffective against incoming fire, not to mention the blast interference previously mentioned. Understandably, this board was unhappy to say the least about these design issues with the Indiana class. In further battleships, they would be designed for a normal load, including not less than 2/3 of the full capacity of ammunition, stores, and coal. That was in 1896, after 2 more classes, the Iowas and Kearsarge, had been designed. Nevertheless, the Indianas, although terrible, made a great impression on foreign observers. Their designers had solved a problem of cramming an enormous weight of ordnance, far more than in contemporary British ships, into a very compact hull. For some reason, the issue of 6-inch quick-firing guns was never brought up, although they could have easily deduced it from contemporary Navy Department reports. Of course, when discussing these sorts of things, I should say these were some of the first battleships designed and built by the United States Navy, and therefore there were some learning curves they needed to figure out, and in further classes, they learned their lessons. It just so happens this class wasn't particularly the best. Another interesting issue with the ships is the fact that when both 13-inch gun turrets trained to one side of the ship, they took on a massive list, to the point where the guns on that side of the ship dipped underwater briefly. Most likely coming from the fact that each turret weighed close to 68 tons apiece. The ships were also unstable, as the designers didn't believe the ships would need bilge keels until Massachusetts had her trials, where the ship rolled heavily, actually unseating her massive turrets. Although the ships had problems, they did serve in the Spanish-American War and into the 20th century, where they did see serious problems throughout their careers, causing them to be decommissioned multiple times, and at the end of their careers, Indiana and Massachusetts were sunk in weapons test, while Oregon was going on to be preserved as a museum ship, but was scrapped in the late 1950s. As I said before, the ships were some of the first battleships of the United States Navy, and there were going to be growing pains. These growing pains were solved in the upcoming buildup of the fleet and the Navy's structure itself. One book I used to help write this video was Trent Hone's Learning War, The Evolution of Fighting Doctrine in the U.S. Navy, 1898 to 1945, where he digs into the development of the U.S. Navy into a blue water navy through the lens of it being a learning organization, in which he covers the development of the officer corps, an important aspect that was outside of the scope of our video. Also, he discusses the influence of Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan on the Navy. In any case, let me know what you think about this class of battleships. Please remember to like and subscribe, as it'll help the channel to grow. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, my friends, have a great week.